The Arctic wind never really stops. It hammers the steel walls, howling like an animal circling the camp, piling snow higher with every hour. Last night, while I was locking up the North Bay doors, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Crunching through the ice, coming closer. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting across nothing but white. The snow was untouched, perfect and smooth, all the way to the horizon. No tracks. No movement. Just silence where there should have been sound. I turned back toward the door and froze. In the thin layer of frost behind me, leading straight to my boots, were footprints. Bare feet. Fresh. The ice still melting where they pressed down. And the last one was less than a foot away from mine. My name is Jacob Lindstrom, and 3 months ago, I was living in a studio apartment in Anchorage, surviving on ramen and rejection letters from every decent job in Alaska. The oil fields wouldn't take me without experience. The fishing boats were full. Even the tourist lodges turned me away. Then I saw the posting on a bulletin board at Northern Lights Employment Services. Warehouse operations, remote location, $4,200 per week, housing. Provided, must be willing to work in extreme isolation. $4,200 weekly. I called the number before I'd even finished reading. The woman who answered, Astrid Bjornsson, had a voice like gravel and spoke with the kind of accent you hear from families who've been in Alaska since before statehood. She asked 3 questions. Could I lift 50 pounds repeatedly? Did I have any serious medical conditions? Was I comfortable being alone for extended periods? Yes, no, absolutely. The job was at Facility 7 North, a supply depot for mining operations somewhere past Dead Horse, where the Trans-Alaska Pipeline disappears into endless white. Astrid warned me it was a 2-person operation, myself and the site supervisor, Torben Eriksson. She also mentioned that the previous worker had needed to take personal leave unexpectedly. I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why they were paying warehouse wages like they were hiring brain surgeons. Should have been suspicious when Astrid insisted I sign a 12-month contract with severe financial penalties for early termination. But I was desperate, and desperate people don't ask the right questions. The helicopter dropped me off on a Tuesday morning in late September. The facility looked like a collection of oversized shipping containers welded together, surrounded by chain-link fence and sodium lights that burned yellow against the perpetual twilight. The warehouse itself was the size of an aircraft hangar, filled with pallets of supplies destined for mining camps scattered across the north slope. Torben met me at the landing pad, mid-50s, built like a tree stump, with pale blue eyes that never seemed to blink. He shook my hand with fingers that felt like frozen steel cables and said exactly 7 words. "Welcome to the end of the world, boy." That first day, he gave me a tour, showed me my quarters, explained the radio protocols for supply drops. Everything seemed normal, professional even. Then he handed me the rules. The paper felt old between my fingers, yellowed at the edges like it had been photocopied countless times. Torben watched me read, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air of the office trailer. Facility 7 North Operational Protocols. Rule 1. Never work alone in the warehouse after 11 p.m. If emergency inventory is required past this time, both personnel must be present. Rule 2. The freezer unit in Section C remains locked at all times. Maintenance personnel have their own access codes. Do not attempt entry for any reason. Rule 3. If you hear knocking on the exterior walls during overnight shifts, ignore it completely. Do not investigate the source. Rule 4. Personal communication devices must be switched off between midnight and 6 a.m. Emergency radio contact only during these hours. Rule 5. During blizzard conditions, if anyone claims to be stranded outside requesting shelter, do not open any doors. Alert your supervisor immediately. Rule 6. The observation windows on the north wall should never be uncovered after sunset. Keep blinds drawn and secured. Rule 7. If the emergency beacon activates without cause, reset it immediately, but do not report the incident. Rule 8. Should you encounter any individual claiming to be from previous shifts, end the conversation and report to your supervisor within the hour. I looked up from the paper. What kind of maintenance requires a locked freezer, and who would be knocking way out here? Torben's expression remained flat. Arctic plays tricks on the mind, Jakob. Sound carries strange in the cold. What seems like knocking might be expanding metal, or ice shifting against the walls. The rules keep you focused on work, instead of chasing shadows. And the people claiming to be stranded. Mining camps shut down without notice. Sometimes workers get confused about which direction leads to safety. We're not equipped to handle medical emergencies or additional personnel. He folded the paper and handed it back to me. These protocols have kept this facility operational for 6 years. Follow them exactly. The first week passed without incident. I learned the inventory system, memorized the layout of the warehouse sections, and adapted to the rhythm of supply drops every few days. The work itself was straightforward: receiving shipments, organizing pallets, preparing orders for helicopter transport to various mining operations. During daylight hours, which grew shorter each day, everything felt routine. But the nights changed things. The building settled and groaned in ways that seemed wrong for a structure designed for this climate. Metal expansion doesn't sound like footsteps. It doesn't pause, listen, then continue with the same measured pace. And it certainly doesn't stop completely when you hold your breath to listen closer. On my 8th night, while updating inventory logs in the office trailer, I heard the first knock. 3 slow raps against the exterior wall, deliberate and evenly spaced. Then silence. I waited, pen suspended over the logbook, counting my heartbeats. 5 minutes passed before 3 more knocks echoed from a different section of the building. Rule 3 echoed in my memory. Ignore it completely. I kept writing, forcing my attention back to supply codes and quantities. But the knocking continued, migrating around the building's perimeter like someone testing each wall for weakness. Always 3 knocks. Always the same interval. Always from a new location. When my shift ended at 2 a.m., I found Torben in the kitchen area of our shared quarters, drinking coffee and reading a paperback novel about submarine warfare. "Rough night?" he asked without looking up. "Heard some knocking. Probably just the metal contracting, like you said." Now he did look up, those pale eyes fixing on mine. "Probably. But you followed protocol?" "Yes," ignored it completely. "Good." He returned to his book. "Jakob, you're adapting well to the isolation. Some workers struggle with the sensory deprivation. Start hearing voices, seeing movement where there isn't any. The mind creates stimulus when it's starved for input." I nodded, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't theoretical advice. "How many workers have you supervised here?" "You're the 7th. He turned a page. The others found different career paths more suitable to their temperament. "All 6 of them. All 6. His voice carried finality that discouraged further questions. I retreated to my room, a small space with a narrow bed, desk, and single window facing west toward the distant pipeline. The blinds were thick plastic, designed to block light completely. I checked the locks on the window, tested the seal around the frame, then pulled the blinds tight. Outside, the wind had calmed to a whisper. In the relative quiet, I could hear my own breathing, the hum of the heating system, and something else, a rhythmic scratching against the exterior wall, like fingernails dragging across metal. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, reminding myself that Rule 3 applied to all exterior sounds. But as the scratching continued for the next hour, moving slowly around the building in the same pattern as the knocking, I began wondering what had happened to those 6 previous workers, and why Torben seemed so certain I would eventually join them. The next morning brought my first real test of the rules. I was reorganizing Section B when the radio crackled to life. Facility 7 North. This is Transport Helicopter 97. We have an emergency landing situation. Engine trouble. Request immediate assistance. I grabbed the handset. Transport 97. This is Facility 7 North. What's your location? About 2 clicks southeast of your position. We're down in the snowfield. 3 passengers, pilot injured. We need shelter and medical aid. My training kicked in. We had first aid supplies, heated shelter, radio contact with emergency services in Deadhorse. I was reaching for the door when Torben's voice cut through the static. Negative. Transport 97, Facility 7. North is not authorized for rescue operations. Contact Deadhorse Emergency Services on frequency 121.5. They will coordinate appropriate response. Jesus Christ, the voice responded. It's negative 40 out here. My pilot's got a head injury and we're losing light. I looked at Torben, who had emerged from the office trailer. His face showed no emotion whatsoever. Standard protocol, he said quietly. We're not equipped for medical emergencies. Transport 907. Emergency services have been notified. Help is en route. Maintain your position and conserve warmth. The radio went silent. We can't just leave them out there, I said. We can and we will. Torben walked past me toward the warehouse. Check the weather reports. There's a storm system moving in. Rescue helicopters will reach them within the hour, or they'll wait until the weather clears. Either way, opening our doors puts this facility at risk. I stared at the radio, listening to empty static. Rule 5 replayed in my mind. If anyone claims to be stranded outside requesting shelter, do not open any doors. But this was an actual emergency, verified by radio contact with specific details, wasn't it? The storm Torben mentioned arrived 3 hours later. I watched through the office window as snow began falling in thick, swirling sheets that reduced visibility to a few feet. The wind picked up, rattling the building's metal frame. By evening, Transport 907 had vanished from radio contact entirely. What happens to people who get stranded out there? I asked Torben over dinner. He cut his reheated beef stew with mechanical precision. Depends how prepared they are, how long they can maintain body heat, whether they make smart decisions or panic. The pilot was injured. Then they make the best of their situation. He met my eyes across the small table. Jakob, this isn't the first emergency call we've received. Won't be the last. Every time someone wants us to open our doors, every time there's a compelling reason why we should ignore protocol and help. You're saying they were lying? I'm saying it doesn't matter. Our job is maintaining this facility, not playing rescue service for everyone who claims distress. He returned to his meal. You'll understand after you've been here longer. That night, the knocking returned with renewed intensity, but this time, it came with voices. Help us! Please! We're freezing out here. The words were muffled by wind and walls, but clear enough to understand. A woman's voice, desperate and pleading. Then a man's voice, weaker, but equally urgent. The pilot's dying. Just let us in until the storm passes." I sat at my desk, hands pressed against my ears, trying to focus on inventory reports. The voices moved around the building just like the knocking had, always staying just outside whichever wall was closest to me. "We know you're in there. The lights are on. Please." Rule 3. Rule 5. Ignore exterior sounds. Don't open doors for stranded personnel. But these weren't random sounds. These were people dying outside while I sat in a heated room, safe and comfortable. The woman's voice grew hoarse, breaking with sobs. The man's voice faded to desperate whispers. At 2 a.m., everything stopped. The silence felt worse than the pleading. I waited for the voices to resume, but heard only wind and the building's normal settling sounds. When my shift ended, I found Torben in the kitchen again. Same book, same coffee. "They stopped calling for help," I said. "Did they?" He didn't look up from his submarine warfare novel. "You heard them too." I heard wind. Storm creates interesting acoustic effects. I wanted to argue, but something in his tone warned me not to push further. Instead, I asked, "How long have you worked here?" 6 years, since the facility opened." "Ever think about transferring somewhere warmer?" Now he did look up, and I caught something in his expression. Not quite sadness, but a kind of hollow resignation. Where would I go? "This is specialized work, Jakob. Not many facilities like this one. Not many people suited for the isolation. But you could find something. With your experience, could I?" He closed the book and studied my face. "Tell me, when you applied for this position, did you mention it to family? Friends? Leave forwarding information?" I thought about it. My parents were dead. I had no close friends in Anchorage, just acquaintances from temporary jobs. The apartment I'd rented was month to month, and I'd given my landlord notice before leaving. No, I guess not. Neither did the others. That's part of what makes someone suitable for this work. No external connections to complicate things. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Complicate what things? Nothing specific, just the nature of remote operations. He stood and rinsed his coffee cup in the sink. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we're expecting a large shipment from Prudhoe Bay. Medical supplies for 3 different mining camps." I watched him walk toward his room, noting how his movements had a careful, practiced quality. Like someone who'd performed the same routine hundreds of times, in the same space, with the same result. Back in my room, I checked the window locks again and secured the blinds. But as I lay in bed, listening to the storm rage outside, I couldn't stop thinking about Transport 97, about the injured pilot and 3 passengers who'd needed help, about the fact that I'd never heard a rescue helicopter arrive, and about Torben's question regarding external connections, because now that I thought about it, he was right. No one in the outside world knew exactly where I was. The employment agency had my general destination, but Facility 7 North wasn't on any public maps. If something happened to me here, who would know to look? Who would even know to ask questions? The wind died down around 4 a.m., and in the relative quiet that followed, I heard something that made my breath catch in my throat. Scratching against my window. Slow, deliberate scrapes across the glass, like someone trying to find the edge of the blinds. I pressed my face against the wall, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. The scratching continued for another minute, then stopped abruptly. I waited in the darkness, counting seconds, until my alarm clock showed 6 a.m. When I finally pulled back the blinds, morning light revealed deep gouges in the frost covering my window. 4 parallel lines, too wide and too deep for fingernails. More like claws. At breakfast, Torben examined the marks with professional detachment. Polar fox, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. They get curious about heat sources during storms. That's pretty high up for a fox. Arctic animals adapt. Climbing, jumping, they do what they need to survive. He handed me a steaming mug of coffee. Speaking of survival, I'll be conducting equipment maintenance in Section C today. You'll handle the Prudhoe Bay shipment alone. Section C, the locked freezer unit from Rule 2. What kind of equipment? Refrigeration systems. Compressors need regular servicing in this climate. He was already pulling on his heavy work jacket. The delivery should arrive around noon. Standard medical supplies, antibiotics, surgical instruments, blood plasma. Nothing complicated. After he left, I tried focusing on morning inventory checks, but my attention kept drifting to the warehouse's north wall. According to Rule 6, the observation windows there should remain covered after sunset. But it was daylight now, and I was curious about what lay beyond them. The north wall featured 3 large windows, each covered by thick industrial blinds secured with metal clips. I unclipped the first blind and peered outside. Nothing but white expanse stretching to the horizon. No trees, no hills, no landmarks of any kind. Just snow and wind-carved ice formations that looked like frozen waves. The second window showed the same view. But when I opened the third blind, I saw them. Structures in the distance. Dark shapes jutting from the snow like broken teeth. Too far away to identify clearly, but definitely human-made. Buildings, maybe, or large equipment left behind by some previous operation. I grabbed binoculars from the office and focused on the distant shapes. What I saw made no sense. They were buildings, or had been, but they sat at wrong angles, tilted and twisted like a child's blocks scattered by a tantrum. Some were buried halfway in snow, others perched precariously on frozen mounds. One appeared to be completely upside down, its roof buried, while its foundation pointed toward the sky. And they were moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely shifting position as I watched. One building rotated clockwise, another sank deeper into the snow. A third one somehow rose higher, despite having no visible support. Fascinating, aren't they? I spun around, nearly dropping the binoculars. Torben stood behind me, his pale eyes reflecting the window's light. I thought you were in Section C. Maintenance finished early. He took the binoculars and peered through them himself. Those structures have been there since before the facility opened, remnants of an experimental mining camp from the 1970s. The permafrost underneath isn't stable. They're moving. Optical illusion. The wind creates mirages, makes stationary objects appear to shift. He lowered the binoculars and began resecuring the blind. That's why Rule 6 exists. Staring at those ruins can become obsessive. Previous workers spent hours watching them, convinced they were seeing movement, patterns, even lights at night. What happened to the mining camp? Abandoned after a series of accidents, equipment failures, personnel disappearances, the usual problems with remote operations in hostile environments. The blind snapped shut with metallic finality. Better to focus on current responsibilities rather than past failures. The Prudhoe Bay helicopter arrived at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. I guided the pilot to the landing pad and helped unload 6 large crates marked with medical supply codes. Standard equipment. Sterile bandages, medications, surgical instruments, and 3 units of whole blood plasma packed in insulated containers. But as I signed the delivery manifest, something caught my attention. The pilot, a weathered Inupiat man named Tommy Aknavagak, kept glancing nervously at the warehouse. "You boys doing okay out here?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Sure, why?" "Last couple deliveries, we've been getting weird radio chatter on this frequency. Voices asking for help, claiming to be stranded. Emergency services never find anyone, though." I felt ice forming in my stomach. What kind of voices? Different each time. Sometimes it's a helicopter crew, sometimes mining workers, sometimes just families claiming their vehicle broke down. Tommy secured the last strap on his cargo bay. Dispatch thinks it might be atmospheric interference, signals bouncing off ice formations, but the voices are always so specific. Names, locations, detailed stories. Have you ever responded to these calls? Hell no. Company policy is to report them to emergency services and keep flying. We're not equipped for search and rescue. He climbed back into the pilot's seat. But Jacob, that is your name, right? Be careful out here. The Arctic makes people hear things, see things, changes them. After the helicopter disappeared into gray, overcast skies, I began moving the medical crates into the warehouse. The first 5 went smoothly, but when I lifted the 6th crate, something inside shifted with a wet, sliding sound. I set it down and examined the exterior. No damage, no leaks, no unusual markings. But when I shook it gently, the contents moved again, not like sealed packages, but like something loose and organic. The manifest listed it as surgical instruments, set 7A, sterile package. But surgical instruments don't slosh. I found a crowbar and carefully pried open the crate's lid. Inside, nestled in foam packing, were 3 clear plastic bags filled with dark red liquid. Not blood plasma. Those came in rigid containers with proper labeling. These bags looked handmade, sealed with tape, and the liquid inside was too thick for blood. Too thick and moving on its own. Something writhed within each bag, pressing against the plastic like a living thing trying to escape. I dropped the crowbar, stumbling backward as one of the bags began to tear along its taped seal. "Jakob!" Torben's voice echoed from the warehouse entrance. I slammed the crate lid shut and kicked the crowbar under a nearby pallet. "Coming!" I called back, my voice cracking slightly. When he reached me, I was standing casually beside the closed crate, trying to control my breathing. "Delivery went smoothly?" he asked. "Yes. 6 crates, all accounted for." He studied my face for a moment, those pale eyes searching for something. "You look pale. Feeling all right?" "Just tired. The storm last night made it hard to sleep." "Understandable." He gestured toward the crates. "I'll help you sort these into proper storage. Medical supplies need climate-controlled conditions." We spent the next hour organizing the contents of 5 crates. Legitimate medical supplies that matched their manifest descriptions perfectly. When we reached the 6th crate, Torben opened it without hesitation. Inside were standard surgical instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps, all properly sterilized and packaged. No mysterious bags, no moving liquid, nothing that shouldn't be there. "Something wrong?" Torben asked, noting my confusion. "No, just... I thought I heard something moving inside earlier. Probably ice crystals forming on the metal instruments. Temperature changes can create interesting acoustic effects." He closed the crate and marked it on his clipboard. "Jakob, you've been doing excellent work, but I'm concerned about your stress levels. Remote assignments can be challenging, especially for newcomers." "I'm fine." "Of course you are. But if you ever feel overwhelmed, if you start experiencing auditory or visual disturbances, it's important to report them immediately. early intervention prevents more serious psychological complications. The way he said psychological complications made it sound like a diagnosis rather than a possibility. That evening, as I prepared for another night shift, I couldn't stop thinking about the bags I'd seen in the crate. Either I was losing my mind, or Torben had somehow switched the contents while I wasn't looking. Both options terrified me. Around 10 p.m., while updating inventory logs, I heard footsteps outside the office trailer. Heavy boots crunching through snow, moving with purpose rather than the random patterns I'd grown accustomed to. I checked my watch. 10:17 p.m. Still 43 minutes before the 11 p.m. threshold in Rule 1. Still safe to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door, expecting to find Torben making his evening rounds. Instead, I found myself staring at a woman in Mine & Company coveralls, her face blue-white with frostbite, ice crystals coating her hair and eyebrows. "Thank God," she said, her voice hollow and strange. "I've been walking for hours. My crew got separated during the storm. Can I come inside? Just until morning?" Every instinct screamed at me to help her. The woman's lips were cracked and bleeding, her fingertips blackened with frostbite. Real frostbite. Real suffering. But Rule 5 echoed in my memory. Do not open any doors. "I'm sorry," I said through the barely open door. "I need to contact emergency services for you. Protocol requires..." "Protocol." Her voice cracked with desperation. "I'm dying out here, look at me." She held up her hands, and I could see the damage was severe. 2 fingers on her left hand were completely black. Dead tissue that would require amputation if she survived. This wasn't someone playing games or testing rules. This was a human being in genuine medical distress. "What's your name?" I asked, keeping the door chain engaged. "Elena Vasquez. I work for North Star Mining. Our transport broke down about 5 miles south of here. The driver tried to fix it, but we hit a whiteout. I've been walking since yesterday." "Where's the rest of your crew?" "Dead." The word came out flat, emotionless. "Hypothermia took them during the night. I found their bodies this morning, frozen solid in the snow." I grabbed the radio handset. "This is Facility 7 North requesting emergency medical evacuation. We have a severely frostbitten mining worker requiring immediate attention." Static answered me. I tried different frequencies, repeated the call, adjusted the antenna. Nothing but empty hiss. "The storm must be interfering with signals," Elena said. "Please, just let me inside until morning. I won't cause any trouble. I just need warmth." Behind me, I heard Torben's bedroom door open. His footsteps approached the office trailer's main room. "Jakob," his voice carried a warning tone. "Who are you talking to?" "Mining worker. Severe frostbite. Radio's not working." Torben appeared beside me, still wearing his thermal sleeping clothes. He looked through the door's small window at Elena, studying her with those pale, emotionless eyes. "Miss, I'm the facility supervisor. We're not authorized to provide medical aid or shelter. Emergency services have been notified and will respond as soon as weather permits." "I didn't hear you make any radio calls," Elena said. "Internal protocols don't require external confirmation." Torben's tone remained professionally detached. "There's a emergency supply cache 2 miles east of here, marked with orange flags. It contains survival gear and medical supplies." 2 miles? In my condition? Elena raised her damaged hands again. "I can barely feel my feet. I won't make it another 100 yards. "Then you should have made better decisions about your original route." Torben began closing the door. "Good luck."
"Wait!"
Elena pressed against the doorframe, At least give me some hand warmers, chemical heat packs, something. I looked at Torben. We had boxes of emergency supplies, including the heat packs she mentioned, basic humanitarian aid that could save her life. Jakob, Torben said quietly, step away from the door. We can't just let her freeze. We can, and we will. His voice carried absolute finality. Close the door. Now. I stared at Elena's desperate face, then at Torben's implacable expression. Rule 5 was clear. Do not open doors for stranded personnel. But following that rule meant watching another human being die. I'm sorry, I said to Elena, and slowly closed the door. Her pounding started immediately, weak at first, then growing frantic as desperation set in. Please, I have kids, a daughter in Fairbanks. Don't let me die out here. The pounding continued for 10 minutes, growing weaker with each strike. Then it stopped. Torben returned to his room without another word. I sat at my desk, staring at inventory reports, while listening for any sound from outside. Silence stretched until my shift ended at 2 a.m. The next morning, I found no trace of Elena Vasquez, no footprints leading to or from the door, no blood, no torn clothing, no evidence anyone had been there at all. The snow around the entrance was smooth and undisturbed, as if it had been falling steadily for hours. Troubled sleep? Torben asked over breakfast. Did you check outside this morning? I did. Nothing unusual. Why? The woman from last night, Elena. There's no sign she was ever here. Torben buttered his toast with mechanical precision. What woman? I stared at him. The mining worker, Frostbite. You spoke to her yourself. Jakob, I think you should consider the possibility that you experienced a stress-induced hallucination. Isolation affects people differently. Sometimes the mind creates elaborate scenarios to cope with sensory deprivation. You were there. You told her about the supply cache 2 miles east. I found you talking to an empty doorway at 10:30 p.m. You seemed agitated, confused. I suggested you get some rest. My hands started shaking. Either Torben was lying, or I was losing my grip on reality faster than I'd thought possible. The radio didn't work when I tried calling for help. The radio works fine. I tested it this morning. He took a bite of toast and chewed thoughtfully. However, there is something we should discuss. Your psychological evaluation. What psychological evaluation? Standard procedure for remote assignments. Corporate requires monthly assessments to ensure workers maintain mental stability. He pulled a tablet from his jacket and scrolled through several screens. Your sleep patterns have been irregular. You've reported auditory hallucinations, knocking, voices, scratching sounds. Now visual hallucinations involving non-existent personnel. These are textbook symptoms of Arctic psychosis. Arctic psychosis isn't a real condition. Isn't it? He turned the tablet toward me, showing a medical document titled Facility 7 North Psychological Assessment, Jakob Lindstrom. My name, photo, and detailed behavioral observations filled the screen. Subject displays increasing paranoia regarding facility protocols. Reports supernatural occurrences with no external evidence. Exhibits obsessive behavior related to observation windows and restricted areas. Recommendation: continue monitoring for 72 hours. If symptoms persist, initiate emergency psychiatric evacuation. When did you write this? I update it daily, part of my supervisory responsibilities. Torben set the tablet aside. Jakob, I want to help you succeed here. But your mental health takes priority over operational requirements. If you're experiencing symptoms that compromise your judgment, we need to address them immediately. I wanted to argue, but doubt crept into my thoughts like cold seeping through broken insulation. Had I imagined Elena, the scratching sounds, the mysterious contents of the medical crate? Everything seemed so real, but isolation could play cruel tricks. What happens if I'm evacuated? Psychiatric treatment in Anchorage, medication, therapy, recovery time. Most workers respond well to intervention. And then? That depends on your progress. Some return to remote work after successful treatment. Others find different career paths more suitable. Like the 6 previous workers who'd left for different career paths. That afternoon, while Torben conducted equipment checks, I decided to test my own sanity. I grabbed binoculars and returned to the north wall observation windows. If the tilted buildings were real, they'd still be there. If I'd imagined them, I'd see only empty snow. I unclipped the third blind and peered outside. The buildings were gone. The distant area where I'd seen twisted structures now showed nothing but smooth white expanse stretching to the horizon. No ruins, no dark shapes, no evidence anything had ever been there. Maybe Torben was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. But as I lowered the binoculars, movement caught my eye. Something small and dark moving across the snow, heading directly toward the facility. I raised the binoculars again and focused on the approaching figure. It was Elena Vasquez. Still wearing the same mining coveralls, still showing the same frostbite damage. But now she moved with purpose rather than desperation, walking steadily through snow that should have been impossible to navigate in her condition. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely visible in the distance, other figures followed. A line of people trudging through the snow, all heading toward Facility 7 North. Some wore mining gear, others helicopter pilot uniforms, still others dressed in ordinary winter clothing. All of them showed signs of severe cold exposure. All of them moved with the same purposeful, mechanical gait. All of them looked dead. I counted them through the binoculars. 12 figures walking in single file through the snow, each maintaining the same measured pace despite varying degrees of visible injury. Elena led the procession, her blackened fingers now clearly visible as she raised one hand to wave at the facility. She knew I was watching. I snapped the blinds shut and backed away from the window, heart racing. Whatever those things were, they weren't human. Not anymore. Humans don't survive overnight in 40 below temperatures with severe frostbite. Humans don't walk in perfect formation across trackless snow. And humans don't wave cheerfully while displaying obvious signs of death. I needed to find Torben, needed to warn him about what was approaching. But as I headed toward Section C, a new sound stopped me cold. Knocking. But not the random 3-rap pattern I'd grown accustomed to. This was systematic, rhythmic, like someone testing the structural integrity of each wall panel. The sound moved around the building's perimeter with mechanical precision. Knock, knock, knock against the east wall. Pause. Knock, knock, knock against the south wall. Pause. Moving clockwise, getting closer to the main entrance. I grabbed the radio handset. Torben, we have a situation. Multiple individuals approaching the facility. They appear to be... Static cut me off. I adjusted the frequency, tried again. Nothing but electronic hiss. The knocking reached the main entrance and stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard voices. Not pleading or desperate like before, but conversational. Casual. Like people discussing the weather while standing on my doorstep. Told you the radio wouldn't work during assessment periods. 3rd building this month, getting more efficient. Jakob's adapting well, though. Better than the last one. My name. They were talking about me by name. I crept toward the main door and peered through the small security window. Elena stood directly in front of the entrance, no longer showing any signs of distress. Her frostbitten fingers had turned a healthy pink color. Her cracked lips were smooth and undamaged. Even her mining coveralls looked clean and pressed. Behind her, the other figures arranged themselves in a semicircle. Now that I could see them clearly, I recognized several faces from missing person reports I'd filed during my brief stint at the Anchorage Police Department. A helicopter pilot named Marcus Reeve who'd disappeared 2 years ago. A geologist named Sarah Chen who'd vanished during the survey expedition. Others I didn't recognize but who bore the same strange transformation from injured to healthy. Elena smiled directly at the security window, as if she could see me watching. "Hello, Jacob," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the steel door. "We'd like to come inside now. We have so much to discuss." I stepped back from the window, grabbing the facility's emergency phone. Deadline. I tried my personal cell phone, knowing it was useless, but desperate for any connection to the outside world. No signal, as expected. "Jakob?" Elena's voice took on a concerned tone. "We know you're frightened. That's natural. Everyone feels scared during their first assessment, but fighting it only makes the process more difficult." Assessment. The same word Torben had used in his psychological evaluation. "We're not here to hurt you," another voice added. Male, authoritative. "We're here to help you understand your situation, to explain what Facility 7 North really is." I backed toward the warehouse entrance, keeping the main door in sight. Whatever they wanted, Rule 5 was clear. Do not open doors for anyone claiming to need shelter, even if they weren't claiming distress anymore. "The rules aren't really about safety, Jacob," Elena continued. "They're about conditioning, teaching you to ignore your instincts, to follow orders without question, to accept that human compassion is less important than operational protocol." The knocking resumed, but now it came from multiple directions simultaneously. They were surrounding the building, testing different entry points. "Torben has been very pleased with your progress. You followed Rule 5 perfectly last night, even when it meant watching someone die. That shows real potential." I reached the warehouse entrance and found the door standing open. Torben's maintenance equipment lay scattered across the floor of Section C, tools abandoned mid-task. But no sign of Torben himself. "Where is he?" I called out. "Torben is fine." Elena's voice carried through the walls with unnatural clarity. "He's completing his own assessment. After 6 years of faithful service, he's earned the right to join us permanently." The warehouse felt different, larger somehow, with shadows that stretched further than the overhead lights should have created. The familiar layout of storage sections seemed distorted, corridors extending into darkness that hadn't existed that morning. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward Section C, where Torben had been working. The locked freezer unit stood open, its heavy door swinging gently on well-oiled hinges. Cold air poured from the opening, carrying a metallic scent that made my stomach turn. Inside the freezer, instead of food storage or equipment, I found a descending staircase carved from ice and stone. Emergency lighting ran along the walls, illuminating a passage that stretched far deeper than the building's foundation should have allowed. "Every facility needs proper storage," Elena's voice echoed from behind me. I spun around to find her standing in the warehouse entrance, no longer outside. Her mining coveralls had been replaced by a clean white uniform bearing the Facility 7 North logo. "How did you get in?" "The same way you will eventually, through acceptance." She gestured toward the staircase. "Torben is waiting for you downstairs. He has so much to show you." "I'm not going anywhere." "Of course you are. You've already passed the primary tests, following rules despite moral objections, accepting isolation without complaint, maintaining operational security even when it conflicts with human decency." She smiled and her teeth gleamed too white in the emergency lighting. "You're exactly what we're looking for." The other figures began entering the warehouse, filing through doors that I was certain had been locked. They moved with coordinated precision, surrounding me but maintaining a respectful distance. "What do you want from me?" "The same thing we wanted from all of them," Elena said, gesturing toward her companions. "Compliance, dedication, the willingness to prioritize facility operations over personal attachments." "And if I refuse?" "Refusal isn't really an option at this point. You signed a 12-month contract with severe penalties for early termination. You accepted employment at a facility that doesn't officially exist. You've participated in activities that would be difficult to explain to outside authorities." She was right. Everything about my employment here existed in a legal gray area. No one knew my exact location. No one would think to look for me here if I disappeared. "Besides," Elena continued, "where would you go? The helicopter won't return for another month. The nearest populated area is over 200 miles away, and winter is just beginning." I backed toward the freezer entrance, keeping the flashlight beam between myself and the advancing figures. What happened to the real mining camp? The experimental facility from the 1970s? There was no mining camp. That was a story Torben tells new workers to explain the ruins they see from the observation windows. Elena's expression grew almost sympathetic. "The ruins are real, Jakob. They're the remains of previous facilities, installations that served their purpose and were recycled." "Purpose for what?" "Research, development, testing the limits of human adaptability in extreme environments." She gestured around the warehouse. "Every worker who comes here contributes valuable data about psychological conditioning, isolation tolerance, and moral flexibility. Most adapt successfully. Some require additional intervention." The figures behind her shifted, and I caught glimpses of surgical scars on their necks, small incisions that looked precise and purposeful. "The medical supplies," I whispered. "The bags I saw in the crate." "Enhancement serums, neurological inhibitors, tools for helping resistant subjects accept their new circumstances." Elena took another step forward. "Torben was quite impressed by your natural compliance. You may not require any chemical assistance at all." I turned and plunged down the icy staircase, my flashlight beam dancing across walls covered in frost and condensation. Behind me, I heard Elena's voice, patient and encouraging. "There's nowhere to run, Jakob. This facility extends much deeper than you realize, and Torben is waiting at the bottom with your final assessment." The staircase descended for what felt like several stories, ending in a circular chamber carved from living rock. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, screens displaying vital signs, brain activity patterns, and psychological profiles. Dozens of them, each labeled with a name and date. At the center of the chamber, Torben stood beside a medical examination table equipped with restraints and IV lines. He wore the same white uniform as Elena, but his pale eyes now held a warmth I'd never seen before. "Welcome to the real Facility 7 North," he said. "Please have a seat. We have so much work to do." On the examination table lay a syringe filled with dark liquid that moved on its own, writhing within the transparent plastic, like a living thing eager to find a new host. "The transformation is quite painless," Torben continued. "Most subjects report feeling liberated afterward, free from the burden of unnecessary emotions, ready to serve a higher purpose." I raised the flashlight like a weapon, knowing it would do no good against whatever these people had become. But before I could speak, the lights went out completely, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. In the blackness, Elema's voice whispered directly into my ear, though I hadn't heard her descend the stairs. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Jacob. You've already proven you belong here." In the complete darkness, I swung the flashlight wildly, trying to reconnect with its beam. My hand found the switch, clicked it frantically, but nothing happened. The bulb had died, or the batteries had drained, or something else had killed the light. "Calm yourself, Jakob." Torben's voice came from directly ahead, though I couldn't see him. Fighting only delays the inevitable. I stumbled backward, hands outstretched, searching for the staircase. Instead, my fingers brushed against cold metal, one of the monitoring stations. The screens were still active, casting eerie blue light across rows of data that showed heart rates, brain waves, and other biological indicators. Each screen displayed a different name: Elena Vasquez, Marcus Reeve, Sarah Chem, and dozens of others, all showing identical vital signs, all perfectly synchronized, as if controlled by a single source. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Torben appeared beside me, his face illuminated by the monitor glow. Complete harmony. No individual suffering, no conflicting desires. Everyone working toward the same goal. What goal? Expansion. He gestured toward the screens. Each facility requires a minimum of 15 personnel to function efficiently. We've been understaffed for months. I edged around the monitoring station, keeping equipment between myself and Torben. The emergency beacon. Rule 7 said to reset it without reporting incidents. You've been calling people here. Among other methods, yes. The beacon sends distress signals that attract rescue operations, mining expeditions, even curious adventurers. Most ignore the calls, but enough respond to maintain our recruitment levels. Another screen caught my attention. This one showed a live feed from somewhere above ground, the warehouse main floor. Elena and her companions moved through the space with purpose, collecting equipment and supplies. But they weren't alone. New figures had arrived, people in heavy winter gear who looked genuinely lost and desperate. A family with 2 small children huddled near the main entrance. An elderly man in a broken-down snowmobile outfit. A young woman who might have been a journalist or researcher. Fresh recruits. "You're using them as bait," I said. "We're offering them shelter and purpose. Far better than freezing to death in a storm." Torben moved closer, forcing me to retreat further into the chamber. "Your concern for strangers is admirable, but misguided. Individual compassion serves no purpose when weighed against collective efficiency." I bumped against something large and metallic. Another examination table, this one occupied. In the monitor's blue glow, I could see the figure strapped to it. A middle-aged man with electrodes attached to his skull. His eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. "That's Henrik Larsson," Torben said, following my gaze. He operated Facility 4 West until last month. Excellent supervisor, but he developed troublesome emotional attachments to his staff. Required intensive reconditioning. The man's vital signs displayed on a nearby screen showed brain activity, but the patterns looked wrong. Too regular, too controlled, like a machine mimicking human consciousness. The serums don't just make people compliant, I realized. They erase who they were. They optimize cognitive function for our specific requirements. Previous personalities often conflict with operational needs. Torben picked up the syringe from the first examination table, holding it up to the light. The dark liquid inside writhed more actively, as if sensing proximity to a potential host. "Your integration will be much smoother. You've already demonstrated exceptional adaptability. I backed against the chamber wall, frantically searching for another exit. The room was circular, with the staircase being the only obvious way out. But Elena and her companions controlled that route now. The rules, I said, playing for time. They weren't just about conditioning. They were about identifying people who could follow orders without question. Partially correct. The rules serve multiple functions. Conditioning, yes, but also protection. Some of our previous subjects retained enough independence to cause problems. They might attempt escape, or worse, try to contact outside authorities. On one of the screens, I watched Elena greeting the stranded family. Her smile looked warm and genuine as she ushered them deeper into the warehouse. The children clung to their parents, exhausted and frightened, but trusting the kind woman who'd offered them safety. Those people don't deserve this. Deserve has nothing to do with it. They're here, they're isolated, and they're available. Perfect candidates for integration. Torben approached slowly, holding the syringe like a doctor preparing for a routine injection. Once you've been processed, you'll understand how liberating it is to serve without doubt or reservation. I grabbed a piece of monitoring equipment, a tablet displaying brain scan data, and hurled it at Torben. He dodged easily, but the device shattered against the wall behind him, sparks flying from its broken circuits. Aggression is normal during pre-integration stress, he said calmly. The serum will correct that tendency. The broken tablet had damaged something important. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing more details about the chamber. I could see additional examination tables, rows of medical equipment, and what looked like a surgical suite in an adjoining room. But more importantly, I could see another exit. A service tunnel marked with radiation warning symbols, leading away from the main chamber. That leads to the waste disposal system, Torben said, noticing my discovery. Highly radioactive. Even brief exposure causes cellular damage that our medical resources cannot repair. Better than whatever's in that syringe. Is it? Radiation poisoning is quite painful. The serum offers peaceful transition to a higher state of existence. I feinted toward the tunnel, then suddenly changed direction, grabbing another piece of equipment and throwing it at the monitoring screens. Glass exploded, circuits overloaded, and several displays went dark. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Now you've complicated things unnecessarily, Torben said, his calm demeanor finally showing cracks. Emergency protocols will activate. The entire facility will seal automatically. As if responding to his words, I heard heavy mechanical sounds from above. Steel barriers sliding into place, locks engaging, ventilation systems shutting down. Whatever was happening up there, Elena and her new recruits were being trapped along with everything else. You're sealing yourself in too, I pointed out. Temporary inconvenience. Emergency lockdown lasts 12 hours, then systems reset automatically. He raised the syringe again. More than enough time to complete your processing and address the damage you've caused. I backed toward the radiation tunnel, weighing my options. Certain death from exposure versus certain loss of identity from the serum. Neither choice offered hope, but one at least let me die as myself. Wait. Torben's voice took on a different tone, less clinical and more human. Jakob, I need you to understand something. The person you think you're saving, yourself, he was never real. What do you mean? Check your employment records, your social security number, your birth certificate. He set the syringe down and pulled out a tablet, swiping through official-looking documents. Jacob Lindstrom exists only in computer databases created 3 months ago. The tablet displayed my employment file, but as he scrolled through it, I could see inconsistencies. dates that didn't align, references to jobs I'd never held, educational records from schools I'd never attended, your memories of Anchorage, your parents, your previous life, all artificial implants. You're not saving Jakob Lindstrom. You're preserving a fictional character we created for this assignment. That's not possible, isn't it? Think carefully. What specific memories do you have of childhood? Can you remember your first day of school, your parents' faces, any birthday celebrations? I tried to recall details from my past, but everything felt vague and generic. Images that could have come from movies or television shows, rather than personal experience. Memory implantation is standard procedure for deep cover assignments. We needed someone who could integrate naturally with facility operations while maintaining emotional distance from outside connections. Torben picked up the syringe again. The serum doesn't erase who you are, Jakob. It reveals who you were always meant to be. You're lying. Am I? Then explain how you adapted so quickly to isolation. Why you felt no urge to contact family or friends. Why following the rules felt more natural than questioning them. The emergency lighting flickered, and in the brief darkness, I saw movement in the adjacent surgical suite. Someone else was down here, moving between the equipment with familiar confidence. When the light stabilized, a figure emerged from the shadows. Another version of myself, wearing the same white uniform as Torben and Elena. His face showed the same calm expression I'd seen on all the other processed subjects. "Hello, Jakob," my doppelganger said. "I'm here to help you understand." "That's not possible." "He's the original," Torben explained. "The template we use to create your current identity. He volunteered for integration 6 months ago and has been assisting with recruitment operations ever since." My double smiled with serene contentment. "The confusion you're feeling is normal. I experienced the same disorientation before processing. But afterward, everything becomes clear. Purpose replaces doubt. Service replaces selfish desire." I stared at this other version of myself, seeing no deception in his eyes, only absolute certainty and peace. "The choice is simple," Torben continued. "Accept integration and join your true self, or maintain the fiction until radiation exposure makes the decision for you." Above us, the alarms stopped blaring. Emergency lockdown was complete. I was trapped underground with 2 people claiming to be my salvation, staring at my own face wearing an expression of inhuman tranquility. "You're still fighting the process," my doppelganger said, taking a step closer. I remember that resistance, the desperate need to believe our constructed memories were real experiences. I backed against the chamber wall, keeping both versions of my captors in sight. If my memories aren't real, then how do I know things? How can I function? "Basic knowledge remains intact," Torben explained. "Language, motor skills, general education. We only replace personal history and emotional attachments. The core personality, your preferences, instincts, decision-making patterns, those come from the original template." He gestured toward my double, who nodded with serene agreement. "Think about it logically," the other Jakob continued. "How did you adapt so quickly to complete isolation? Most people would be calling family within the first week, desperate for familiar voices. But you never felt that urge, did you?" He was right. I'd accepted the separation from my old life with disturbing ease. No homesickness, no longing for human connection beyond basic professional interaction. It had felt natural, but now I wondered if that was because there was nothing real to miss. "The employment agency," I said. "Astrid Bjornsson. She interviewed me." "A construct. The building exists, but the agency is a front operation. We maintain offices in several cities to recruit suitable candidates. Torben checked something on his tablet. Your psychological profile indicated strong compliance tendencies and minimal external connections, perfect for our needs. I tried to remember specific details from the interview, but like everything else from my supposed past, it felt generic and vague. Had I ever actually spoken to Astrid Bjornsson, or was that just another implanted memory? Show me proof, I demanded. If you can create fake documents, how do I know what you're showing me is real? My doppelganger smiled. Because deep down, you already know the truth. The relief you felt when you got this job. Wasn't it too strong for someone just escaping poverty? You felt like you were coming home, didn't you? The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Taking the position at Facility 7 North had felt like destiny rather than desperation, like I belonged here, despite never having worked in anything remotely similar. The rules didn't feel restrictive, the other Jakob continued. They felt protective, comforting, because part of you remembered why they exist. On the remaining functional monitors, I could see Elena leading the stranded family through the warehouse. The children had stopped crying, their expressions growing blank and peaceful as they walked deeper into the facility. Whatever process was happening to them, it was already beginning. How many facilities like this exist? I asked. 17 currently operational, Torben replied. We're expanding into South America and Southeast Asia next year. Each facility requires specialized personnel who can function in extreme isolation while maintaining operational security. What's the ultimate purpose? What are you really doing here? Resource extraction, population management, social conditioning experiments. Torben spoke as if discussing mundane corporate activities. The methods we develop here have applications far beyond remote facilities. Urban environments, corporate structures, educational institutions, anywhere compliance and efficiency are valued over individual autonomy. I thought about the synchronized vital signs on the monitors, the identical expressions on every processed subject's face. You're creating a hive mind. We're optimizing human potential, eliminating the inefficiencies of individual will and emotional chaos. The other Jakob's voice carried absolute conviction. I remember your skepticism, but after integration, you'll understand how liberating uniformity can be. What about free will? Choice? Everything that makes us human? Outdated concepts that cause unnecessary suffering. When everyone shares the same goals and methods, conflict becomes impossible. War, crime, political disagreement, all eliminated through proper conditioning. The emergency lighting flickered again, and I heard new sounds from above. Heavy footsteps, multiple voices, the hum of additional equipment being activated. Elena was apparently moving fast to process the new arrivals before the lockdown ended. 12 hours, I said. That's how long until the facility unlocks. Correct. More than sufficient time for your integration and orientation to the community. Torben prepared the syringe again, checking the dark liquid inside. The process itself takes approximately 30 minutes. Recovery and initial conditioning require several additional hours. And if I choose the radiation tunnel, cellular breakdown begins within minutes. Death occurs in 2 to 4 hours, depending on your proximity to the waste storage core. My doppelganger spoke matter-of-factly, as if describing weather conditions. Quite painful, according to our observations. You've watched people die that way before? 3 previous subjects chose radiation over integration. We learned valuable data about pain tolerance and decision-making under extreme stress. His expression remained pleasant and detached. Their sacrifice contributed to improved conditioning protocols. I studied this other version of myself, looking for any trace of the person I thought I was. But his eyes held only calm contentment, like someone who'd found perfect peace through complete surrender. "If I'm just a copy," I said slowly, "then my fear, my resistance, those aren't real either. They're real responses from an artificial personality," Torben explained. "The original Jakob experienced identical reactions before accepting his true purpose. Think of your current distress as an echo of his genuine emotions. Which means everything I'm feeling right now, the horror, the desperation to escape, he felt those too. Of course, but he made the rational choice. He recognized that clinging to fabricated identity served no constructive purpose." I looked at my doppelganger again. "Did you volunteer for this, or were you coerced?" "I volunteered after understanding the full scope of our mission. Individual consciousness is a barrier to human evolution. We're helping the species take its next evolutionary step. By destroying what makes us individuals. By eliminating the source of all human conflict and suffering." His smile never wavered. "Jakob, you're fighting a battle that's already been won. The choice was made months ago when the original accepted integration. You're simply experiencing delayed processing." The monitors showed Elena's group had reached another section of the warehouse. The family was being separated, parents led in one direction, children in another. Their expressions had grown completely vacant, showing no distress at the separation. You process children too. Age is irrelevant to cognitive optimization. Younger subjects actually adapt more readily to integration protocols. Torben followed my gaze to the monitors. Those children will never experience the confusion and pain you're feeling right now. They'll transition smoothly to their new purpose. I thought about the rules again, particularly Rule 8. If you encounter any individual claiming to be from previous shifts, report to your supervisor immediately. Not because they were dangerous, but because they represented failed integration attempts, people who'd somehow retained enough of their original identity to resist the process. How many people have you processed over the years? Several thousand across all facilities. Success rate exceeds 97%. Torben checked his tablet again. The remaining 3% provide valuable data about resistance factors and optimization opportunities. What happens to the failures? Depends on the nature of their resistance. Some respond to additional conditioning. Others serve as test subjects for new techniques. My doppelganger gestured toward the radiation tunnel. A few choose self-termination rather than accept improvement. The casual way he discussed mass psychological manipulation made my stomach turn. These weren't people anymore. They were components in some vast machine designed to strip away everything that made human beings unique. "The original Jakob," I said, "before the processing. What was he really like?" "Curious, stubborn, occasionally impulsive." The other Jakob tilted his head thoughtfully. He had a strong sense of justice that often conflicted with practical necessity, not unlike yourself. And you don't miss any of that? Miss implies loss. I've gained clarity, purpose, belonging to something greater than individual desire. The petty concerns that once troubled me, loneliness, uncertainty, moral dilemmas, no longer exist. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Torben stepped closer, syringe ready. Fear is temporary. Purpose is eternal. You're delaying the inevitable, Jacob. The facility is sealed. The radiation tunnel offers only painful death. Integration offers transcendence. I looked at the tunnel entrance with its warning symbols and promise of cellular destruction. then at the syringe, with its writhing contents and guarantee of identity erasure. Both choices meant the end of everything I thought I was, but as I stood there, waiting two forms of death, I realized something that neither Torben nor my doppelganger had considered. If my memories were artificial, if my identity was fabricated, then my attachment to them was artificial too. Which meant I might be able to let go of Jakob Lindstrom and still survive as something else entirely. The radiation detector I had rigged from broken monitoring equipment clicked steadily as I adjusted the ventilation system. Low-level exposure, but manageable if I stayed careful about timing and shielding. The counter serum I'd synthesized from Elena's abandoned medical kit wouldn't last much longer, but it had done its job. I looked down at my hands, still recognizably mine, but changed. The cellular damage from controlled radiation exposure had altered my genetic markers enough to confuse the facility's biological scanners. To their systems, Jakob Lindstrom no longer existed. Neither did the original. The underground chamber had become my laboratory for the past 18 days. Using equipment salvaged from Torben's surgical suite, I'd managed something none of us had anticipated. I'd merged the artificial memories with fragments of the original's consciousness, creating something new. Something the facility couldn't identify or control. On the monitors, I watched the daily routines above ground. Elena led her expanded community through warehouse operations with mechanical precision. The stranded family moved among them, their children now indistinguishable from the other processed subjects. Everyone perfectly synchronized, perfectly compliant. They thought I was dead. The radiation tunnel's emergency sensors had detected my initial exposure and reported cellular breakdown consistent with fatal poisoning. My vital signs had disappeared from their monitoring systems when the genetic alterations reached critical mass. But I had survived by becoming someone else entirely. The facility's reset cycle would complete in 6 hours. Emergency lockdown would end, and external communications would resume. Supply helicopters would arrive. New recruits would be collected from whatever false distress signals Elena's team had broadcast, unless I stopped them. I'd spent 2 weeks studying the facility's design, mapping its systems, understanding how 17 installations coordinated their operations. The underground complex extended much deeper than Torben had revealed, connecting to power generation, communications arrays, and what appeared to be some kind of central processing hub. The dark liquid from the syringes wasn't just neurological inhibitors. According to the research files I'd accessed, it contained self-replicating nanomachines designed to interface with human nervous systems. Once introduced, they created permanent connections to the facility's central consciousness. Every processed subject became a node in an expanding network. But nanomachines had vulnerabilities. I activated the electromagnetic pulse device I'd constructed from warehouse equipment and facility generators. The pulse wouldn't destroy the nanomachines, but it would disrupt their communication protocols long enough to create chaos in the network. Above ground, the synchronized movements stopped abruptly. On the monitors, I watched Elena stumble, her perfect composure cracking as competing signals flooded her neural pathways. Other subjects wandered aimlessly, their coordinated purpose shattered. The processed children began crying, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from them since their arrival. Phase 2 required more precision. Using Torben's access codes, I initiated a facility-wide communications burst to all 17 installations. The message was simple: integration protocols compromised, initiating emergency sterilization. Each facility's automated systems would interpret this as a catastrophic contamination event. Emergency protocols would seal all exits, flood the complexes with sterilizing agents, and maintain lockdown until external recovery teams arrived. Recovery teams that would find empty buildings and evidence of massive psychological conditioning programs. The monitors showed Elena's community collapsing into genuine panic as their artificial unity dissolved. Some subjects ran toward exits that would no longer open. Others stood motionless, overwhelmed by the return of individual consciousness. I'd given them back their ability to feel fear, confusion, and hope. Not a perfect gift, but better than the alternative. The electromagnetic pulse was already fading. In a few hours, the nanomachines would re-establish connection and restore the network. But by then, external authorities would be investigating 17 facilities across multiple continents. I climbed toward the warehouse level, carrying supplies for a long journey across the Arctic. The radiation exposure had bought me genetic anonymity, but it had also started a cellular countdown I couldn't reverse. Weeks, maybe months before the damage became critical. Enough time to reach civilization. Enough time to tell someone what I'd discovered. Behind me, alarms began sounding as the facility's automated systems detected my sabotage. But Jakob Lindstrom remained officially dead, and the person walking away from Facility 7 North existed in no database anywhere. I stepped into the Arctic wind, leaving 17 broken installations and thousands of freed minds in my wake. The cold felt like freedom.